Right, we typically give it a few minutes just so attendees can come in. All right, we'll give it one more minute. All right, welcome to the Michigan ASLA Foundation DEI Diverse Perspective Series webinar. Today we will be having a very special guest, Glenn LaRue Smith. He is a co-founder and principal of Push Studio and founder of the Black Landscape Architects Network. He will be presenting a diverse career, design, and service. And just a little bit about him. He has been focusing on urbanism-centered design at the intersection of landscape architecture for about 40 years. And as a managing creative partner of Push Studios, his philosophy reveals the intrinsic value of sites, inspires creative team collaboration, and shapes cultural landscape environments. He has served as the chairman of the Graduate Landscape Architecture Program at Morgan State and Florida A&M, as well as teaching at City College of New York, University of Michigan, Columbia University, and Rutgers. He is founder and former president of the Black Landscape Architects Network, which is a nonprofit organization established to provide support to Black students and professionals. He is a past recipient of the 2020 ASLA Distinguished Service Award and is a distinguished fellow as well. He holds an MLA from University of Michigan, so he is a Michigan native, and a great link to our Michigan Diverse Perspective series, and a Harvard graduate, as well as a Spring 2020 Mellon Fellow. So I will pass this off to, oops. To Glenn.
Okay, thanks, Kim. Can you see this?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much for inviting me. Like Kim mentioned, I I'm actually grew up in Mississippi, but I've had a sister who was an attorney in Detroit, and so I spent a lot of my teenage years visiting Detroit in the summers. And one of my fondest memories is visiting Hudson's department store for shopping. And that may be one of my unconscious reasons for attending the University of Michigan graduate program, aside from the scholarship that I got. So, so today I want to talk a bit about a diverse career in design and service. And I want to start out by talking about my work and what I like to call that advocacy, and also my research work, which continues, because I think even though I've been working 40 years, you never stop learning, and you always continue to do research and advocacy and other work. And the advocacy portion of it, I think, is very important as a Black landscape architect, because there are very few of us in the profession, about 2% of the total landscape architects in the country. And I have always tried to mentor, connect with as many other Black landscape architects as I could. So recently, over the past 4 years, I've been mentoring quite a few Black landscape architects. But I have to say that over my career, I've mentored and taught a tremendous number of landscape architects of all races. So, but because I was the first graduate of the landscape architecture program at Mississippi State University, where I had a great camaraderie with my fellow students, but I always felt a bit isolated, because I often wondered, were there other Black landscape architects? And I only met another Black landscape architect when I went to graduate school at the University of Michigan in 1977. And that was Elon Nichols, now deceased. And I met with him in his office, and at the time he was working on landscape projects in Atlanta for the MARTA subway system. And then in terms of research, I have this spring 2022 Millen Fellow in Urban Landscape Studies, which is a part of the Dumbarton Oaks Fellowship Program. And I have to admit that I'm very sad, because it started in January and it's about to end in May. But it has given me a great deal of time to organize my thoughts on the project that I'm working on, which I will tell you about. So in terms of founding the Black Landscape Architects Network, I always feel a little funny about saying founding, because there are a lot of other people who were at least on the steering committee and involved in making this decision to go to a nonprofit organization. And if you go to our website, which is listed here, and this is the front page from the website, which outlines what our key visions are and how we plan to accomplish that. Increasing Black landscape architecture visibility and representation in the profession. And so there on that website, you'll see the board of directors, the advisory council, which I'm a member of. I stepped down in January as the first president of the organization. The new president is Mark Miller, who's a professor of landscape architecture at Penn State. And you'll also see that we have a student council, and that was formed to create more outreach to members that were Black landscape architects scattered in programs around the country. And and also there's an emerging professionals council, which was also started to connect with emerging professionals who are just out of school, starting to work, and have at least 8 years of experience. Also, you'll note under scholarship on the website that we in this spring we gave out our first 2 scholarships under the name of Edward Lyons Price, who was the first Black landscape architect to be elevated to fellow in 1979. And so we're very, his daughters are the ones who funded this first set of scholarships. And they're great people, and they were very excited to have their father's legacy connected with this scholarship. In terms of research, the work I'm doing at through the Millen Foundation in Dumbarton Oaks is titled "Out of the Shadows: Black Landscape Architects 1898 to 1965." Many of you may or may not know that David Williston was the first Black landscape architect who graduated from Cornell in 1898. And so I stopped in 1965 because at that point, after 1965, there started to be more of a proliferation of Black landscape architects in schools around the country. And so I needed to narrow the focus of who I was looking at. The purpose of this is to document key projects that these Black landscape architects have worked on, and bring that to people who I think generally don't know about these Black landscape architects. And it didn't take long for me, once I started doing this research, to realize that how important this was, because the first person here that you see, Robert L. Davis, I just found out about him about a year ago. His daughter called me because she found my name on under the Black Landscape Architects Network, which is another good reason for the Black Landscape Architects Network. And she called me up and she said her father was a Black landscape architect, and he's actually 102 years old. And so he's undoubtedly the oldest Black landscape architect in the country. And so it just kind of fell in my lap, and I've interviewed him, and I have to go back and interview him again. But he worked for the State Department working on the embassies around the world for 20 years. It's about 1980. Well, he retired in 1975. So if you do the math. And then others are, Edward Lyons Price, who was also the landscape campus planner for Tuskegee University, and he also worked alongside David Williston at some point at Tuskegee. Clinton Hewitt, who was the campus planner for the University of Minnesota, and University of Minneapolis in Minnesota, and Bill Wilson, who is the principal of Centera, which is a landscape design, development, and planning firm in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. So there are many others, but this is sort of the front page of the presentation that I gave to my cohorts when I first started the fellowship at Dumbarton Oaks in January. So now I'm going to talk a bit about my practice and what I've done over the years. It bounces back and forth in terms of projects, but I'll explain why it does that in terms of how I developed a design process, and also how these projects have been in some ways the work that I've been doing in public practice, private practice, and academia has really, the shifts in my work has really been about shifts in the economy. And I think a lot of young landscape architects don't know about this because the economy hasn't shifted so much. I think the pandemic has created more of an uncertainty in the job market than at any time before. But one of the great things about being educated as a landscape architect is that you learn so many things. You learn about engineering, you learn about architecture, interiors a little bit, plants, environmental issues. So it gives one the ability to work in many different aspects of the profession. You probably all know people who work in the public sector for planning departments, for the Forest Service, the Department of General Services, in private practice for all sorts of firms that do environmental work, to high-end residential work, to high-end projects around the world. So I've had this diverse career because I am a landscape architect, and I've had the opportunity to move into different aspects of the profession based on the shifts in the economy. And so I've never really been out of work for any period of time more than 6 months in the beginning of my career. I started out my career after my undergraduate degree from Mississippi State University. And that was another one of those periods in 1975 when the economy was not great. And I couldn't find a job in a lot of the major landscape architecture firms. And I have to say that I also had some difficulty finding jobs in those firms because I am Black. And so I'm happy to say that environment has changed in terms of job opportunities. But my first job out of undergraduate school was with the Corps of Engineers with the Vicksburg, Mississippi district. And I worked on 5-year master plan updates for large recreational facilities at their hydroelectric power plants and reservoirs in Arkansas, Mississippi, and Louisiana. I hated the job, but it was after 2.5 years, I left the job and went to the University of Michigan in graduate school. And it was at the University of Michigan that I finally realized that even though I didn't like the job, I learned so much. I knew public speaking, I knew writing, I knew all sorts of things that I don't think I would have gotten in a private practice office. So I say that to tell, if there are any young people listening, that whatever job you can get out of school, make the best of it until you can move on to the next job, because you always learn something on each job. So that's just a little lead into how I have this diverse career in public practice, private practice, and academia. This project that I'm showing is actually what's called the Once and Future Park competition. And this was actually while I was working in 1991, while I was teaching at the University of Michigan. And I was one of 9 Midwestern landscape architects who were selected to develop competition designs on the future of parks. And so, as you can see here, there were some University of Michigan students who worked with me on this project. And to go down the list, Patricia McGurr was one of my students, and she was also a research assistant for me. And she's now a tenured professor at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst. And Ramon Murray worked on the project, and he now has his own firm, Murray Studio, in Orlando, Florida. So I titled my project Urban Street Parks because I've always been interested in the intersection of architecture, landscape, urban design. And so it involves, this is a cover of a report I did for the project, and it involves spatial reconstructions along Woodward Avenue, which is the stripe in the middle of the image there. And so what I did is I worked on the Detroit River is at the bottom of the screen, and I worked on the theater park, which is at the Fox Theater. There was a middle ground, which I didn't do specific designs on. And then there was a cultural park, which is Woodward Avenue at the Detroit Institute of Art and the public library, which face their classical buildings, which face each other. This was one of the concept models. This was at the beginning of my developing a design process that involved symbolic thinking, doing models that were not traditional types of models, but were almost sculptural in a way that really were based on an idea. And so this was a conceptual model for the theater park, which was all about refracted light. And one of the other methodologies for this design process is to do very spontaneous drawings that are not always real drawings, but they become symbolic of the idea that one is working with. And so it's really about the intrinsic value of the place that you're looking at. It's almost like an archaeology of place. Each place is very different. So my feeling is that whenever possible, each design should have a unique basis by which its physical form is manifested. And these are sketches that relate to the public park, the public library, and the Detroit Institute of Art. And it's all about, on the left-hand side, I'm sorry, it's all about the shifting planes and trying to create sort of a classical bosque that relates to the classicism of the two buildings. And so here you can see that the Detroit Institute of Art on the left and the public library on the right. So the idea was to mediate between these two classical spaces by bridging over Woodward Avenue. And so these are more sketches for that cultural park, as I called it. And so the concept was a metaphorical suggestion of idealized nature, the bosque, superimposed over the existing street. Through an abstraction of street vibration and light, the bosque is fractured and displaced to create an interchange of spatial relationships and meanings. The site grid as a field of books, knowledge, provides the second design layer. And these are just more sketches that are about the idea of the books and about the fractured bosque system. And so this is the final design, which I want to tell you was done by hand by me and the students on Mylar with ink. Those days are gone, but it was a great exercise. And here is that design was manifested in models that were all wood, and these are actually wood dowels for trees. And we used a process using gesso and graphite, mixing it together, painting it on the wood, and then polishing it with paper bags that gives it this shine and this sort of abstracted spatial quality. So what I wanted to do was I wanted to really focus on the spatial quality as opposed to the detail of what a tree leaf looks like or a street pattern. because I think it's very important for landscape architects to craft spatial quality. And this is another view of the one of the models. The next project skips some years, and this was when I was working at the City College of New York starting in 1992, and it's on 125th Street in Harlem. And the team included the Urban Technical Assistance Project, which doesn't exist anymore, but it was sort of a community development arm of the Columbia University. And I worked with Gillian Erminu, who was the project manager, and she was an architect, and we also taught together at the City College of New York, and myself as the designer. And so the history of the square is that it was always a place where Black activism took place. And you'll see in the lower right-hand corner of this page, that is the state office building. And in the lower left-hand of the image, you'll see the clearing of the space to create that state office building. But in the background, you can see the texture of the brownstones, and that covered that whole space that they demolished. And it was all done by eminent domain. And unfortunately, Black community was not able to master the state. The state was a bigger operation. And so the state office building was built on the corner. So the idea of this project was to create a plaza in front of that state office building. And so the concept that we came up with was extracting the African tree of life and village structure to organize the plaza. So these are some of the images from the conceptual board that we created, because we had to present this not only to the state, the Economic Development Corporation, people from the state General Services Administration, but also the community board in Harlem. Again, just to illustrate that I always begin this ideation with 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper and black pens, and I just start doing intuitive sketches based on my impressions and information about the site. And so this was all about the fact that the building is a large dark volume that dominates the space. And so the platform spatial volume is shorter than the architectural volume, creating a ill-proportioned sort of landscape. So the landscape needed to whatever the landscape was, needed to in some way match the volumetric dominance of the building on the site. And so these was, again, a series of sketches looking at how to do that. There was a parking garage underneath that the General Services Administration was going to redo because there was a lot of leaking. So that's what predicated the community board's desire to create a much more public space in front of the building. More sketches. And so this is kind of an analysis that brings together the conceptual idea and the spatial arrangement on the site. So 125th Street is at the bottom of the image, and Frederick Douglass Boulevard is here on the left. This is the State Office Building number 3. Number 2 is creating a performance space. Number 1 is creating an entrance. Right at the very corner is an existing sculpture of Adam Clayton Powell. So we wanted to respect that, but create this core 10 steel spatial volume around the street that allow people to penetrate it at various points. And to create, and number 4 is actually to create a market space, because this 125th Street is a very market-oriented street in the sense that vendors will come and just set up on the street. So this is a conceptual rendering of what the idea was all about. Creating these interactive digital kiosks on both the left and the right hand side near the proposed market area, creating more seating, creating a stage area in front of the state office building. Unfortunately, it pains me, but they redid the surface, repaired the leaks to the parking underneath, but the only thing they did was the paving pattern that you see here. So we were very disappointed, but you know, this happens with design projects. The next project is the Stafford County Armed Services Memorial, and that we're jumping ahead to 2017 with my firm here in Washington, DC, Push Studio, worked on this project. And Klein Memorials is a design and fabrication, granite design and fabrication company that we worked with. And Galicia Construction constructed the project for us. So the idea behind this was the client was a group of military people who wanted to create a memorial that would honor all the Stafford County, Virginia service people from all branches of the service who had fought in all the wars in the United States. And so so our concept for this was that the memorial forms signify this marching in formation to depict the many wars in which Stafford County, Virginia citizens have served to secure national and international freedom. And this is from an initial booklet that we provided the client. Now, one of the challenging aspects of this project was that the client had already had a local high school. They had a competition, and they selected 6 student projects for this memorial. So our charge as the new client was to infuse one element of each of the 6 designs, student designs, into our design. And it turned out to be not as much of a challenge as we thought it would be. So these are, I'm jumping ahead and showing you some of the construction processes before I show you the final design. But the county offices are just to the left of this lower right-hand photograph where they're creating the entry plaza for the design. You can see in the upper right-hand picture, we're just about to do some planting, and there's what's called a Kugel fountain, which is one of those fountains that is rotated by the pressure of the water. And there's also, just behind it, is a memorial wall that depicts military service members. This is the final project. So you can see in the background the memorial wall and the Kugel fountain. And these are the markers that march up the slope at it's about a 5% slope that depict all the different wars. This photograph was taken in 2018. So we have to take new photographs because I've been out there, and the plantings behind the memorial have grown up substantially. So it's much nicer kind of feeling. And this is kind of a lower level, pedestrian level of view of the memorial. So because of this project, we have gotten into more memorial projects with other clients, either through client memorials that we created, sort of create a design build relationship with, or from other people contacting us because of this project. And so we've created 2 projects, centennial monuments for the Phi Beta Sigma fraternity on Howard University's campus, and also the most recently, the Zeta Phi Beta sorority centennial monument on Howard University's campus, as well as some others. Right now we're working on a Harriet Tubman North Star Memorial Plaza in Cambridge, Maryland, which is where she was originally from. Just more images of the memorial. The stone that you see on the left-hand side, there's a closer view of the stone, which is called Virginia Mist. And this is where working with Klein Memorials was really great, because they had such a wonderful knowledge of the different types of stone, how you could carve on certain stones and etch on other stones. So the memorial monument you see in the black is all black granite, because the images are etched into it as opposed to carved like these monument pieces. So here you can see the Kugel fountain and the memorial wall in the background. The next project is it's a program called the Land Art Generator Initiative competition. And it's a competition that's held every 2 years in different parts of the world. And this one was held in Copenhagen. And the idea is to create a sculptural piece that generates energy. And so this was our entry for this competition. We didn't place in the competition, but every 2 years they create a publication. And out of the 300 entries, we were one of the 50 entries that were highlighted in the book produced for this Copenhagen competition. And so our concept was the hive engages the structure of the honeycomb to organize solar orbs for energy generation. So these solar orbs, they have a liquid in them. It's somewhat like photovoltaic panels but this one heats up the liquid and creates energy in these globes. So this is the total image of the sculptural structure on the site, and it has you'll see on this next slide, it shows it does have a pedestrian circulation system that moves through the sculptural structure, which also sits in a water body. And this is a view from the river. It's an old industrial site that was used for the competition. And so this next one is also related to the land art. Next design is related to the land art generator competition, but they've started doing them in mid-year in specific locations around the country. So this particular one was for the Willimantic Water Whitewater Partnership in Willimantic, Connecticut. And so we entered it, and we were shortlisted along with 2 other firms to create designs for the site. We didn't win this one, but it was a great opportunity for us being shortlisted. And the team included these 2 architecture firms and Inspire Green, which is a woman and Black-owned civil engineering firm here in Washington, D.C. These are images of the site, which is really a beautiful site with rapids. The plan shows the site that we were allowed to use. And so the concept was real. The site is known for weaving based on water generation to create energy. So it was a big manufacturing part of Willimantic in the early 19th century. So we drew upon this idea of weaving as a start for a concept, and this idea of thread-like site strategy, and also the sort of triangulation of the site based on some boundary restrictions. The river on one side, there was a spoil mound that we had to keep because the site had been partially remediated. And so these are just some of the sketches working out pedestrian circulation based on the concept and how we could pull this whole project together. So these are the final panels. Below here, you can see a section that shows the energy generating sculptural piece that we created with photovoltaic panels, and also a platform bridge that, it's not quite a bridge, but a platform that cantilevers across over the river. And the idea was that in the future, they could actually build the bridge from the other side and connect it as a real bridge across the river. And we also, you can see on the lower right-hand corner, we created a place for canoe and kayak launching as well. Oops, sorry. So here's a view looking back from the river with the steps that we're creating down to the river for launching kayaks and canoes. And you may not have noticed in the lower right-hand corner right here, there's a little frog. We sort of added that as kind of a joke in this image. And so we terraced the whole area, and this is sort of the idea of thread and weaving sort of shifted into this whole idea of fanning out the space to create this this design expression. And this is a view of the final sculptural design for energy generating. And on the lower right-hand corner, you see the sculpture sits at a high point in the city. So the idea was that as the weather changes, if there's snow coming, if there's rain coming, the sculptural piece would actually change color. So it would create this beacon in the city so you could understand when the weather was going to change. So this next project is the Zeta Phi Beta sorority International Centennial Monument that I was telling you about on Howard University's campus. Sorry, I'm just checking the time. And so again, we used the same, it was the same team that we used for the Stafford County Armed Services Memorial. So again, conceptually, the idea was that the dove is their sort of mascot, I guess. And so we started doing a series of imagery that we could communicate with the client to talk about how we would conceptualize creating this monument. So it wasn't just a typical granite monument, but it was one that had some relationship to their logo and the dove. So this is the final rendition of that. And this gray portion of the memorial, Centennial Memorial, really is that expression of the dove and flight and feathers. This is some of the, we always like to show not only the conceptual part of what we do, but also the construction part of what we do. And so this is at the fabrication company in Vermont. And so the upper left-hand corner is actually the Virginia Mist granite, which is being carved into this gray portion of the monument. It's a separate piece. So it's actually, there are actually three pieces to this. The background piece, which is a gray granite, the Virginia Mist, and also the base, which is gray granite. And then the lower right-hand image shows the laser etching of the black granite piece, which I'll show you in the next image, is actually a part of the bench that was created. These are, again, there is some construction photographs. In the upper left-hand corner, you can see the main monument, but this is a bench component that was added to this oval plaza space. And behind it, and on top of it, covered in black right now, is the black granite piece that was being etched in that image. That black granite piece that sits on the bench, as you can see in this lower left-hand image, was done because they had so many donors that couldn't fit all on the back. The names couldn't be etched on the back of totally on the back of the main monument. So this next and last project is one that I like to show because it's one of my favorite projects. It's a brownstone garden in Harlem that was done for on the left-hand photograph, the moving from left to right, those are the clients. And that's me on the far right-hand corner. And I mean, right-hand part of the picture. And so this is the existing condition of the garden before it was completed. And on the left-hand photograph, you can see that their neighbors really had illegally built a deck too close to their property, but they felt like they didn't want to report them to the city of New York. And so part of the design was to somehow mask their illegal deck. So the clients are, I should have mentioned also that both the clients, she's a doctor, he was a professor at the New School for Social Research. And they were both they're both from the Caribbean, so they wanted a tropical garden. Well, it was not really possible to give us a tropical garden in New York City, but what I did was I referenced, Caribbean culture and colors, and to create a garden. This is a plan for the garden, and the basement level actually comes out into the garden about 12 feet. And this B indicated here is actually a skylight, because they actually have a jacuzzi in the basement, which is under this skylight. And that was quite an engineering feat, because the jacuzzi had to be craned in over a 3-story brownstone into this hole before the skylight was put in. And this is just a conceptual sketch before the project was completed, just to give the clients an image of what it would be like. And so on the left-hand side, you can see how we resolved the issue of the deck that was illegal. This is during construction, and this guy here, Robert Reitmeyer, is a graduate of Rutgers University, but he does primarily landscape construction. So he was great to have on site, because if there was something out of alignment, he would call me and ask me about it. He never made a move without, he had a design sensibility, which was fantastic. So here are images of the finished project about 6 months after it was planted. And so I planted everything very close together, knowing that they'd have to come back and weed out some of the plants, but I wanted to give them that immediate sort of, if not tropical, lush feel. And so you can see on the left-hand image how we dealt with the illegal deck that was too close to the building, to their garden. The orange wall was to give them that sense of, as we see here, that sense of tropical vibe. And the door in the back, of course, leads nowhere, but it sort of helps to give the illusion that there's more space than there really is. Some more shots, and the great thing about this project is that the sunlight really shining on this orange wall really is quite beautiful. So that ends my presentation, but I love to end on this project because it's just an indication of what rich things you can do even at a small residential scale. And so I hope that gives you an idea of my diverse career, and I'm happy to take any questions. Kim, are you there?
Hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay, great. If any of our attendees want to ask a question, we have a Q&A box where they can enter in their questions. Oops. And typically at these webinars, we like to ask what advice you would give to your younger self or someone getting into LA.
You know, given my experience at my first job with the Corps of Engineers, I think I would go back to what I said originally, that my advice would be, you almost never get the job that you think you want when you're right out of school. And that I think the best positive attitude about any job that you get is that I might not like it totally. I might not want to be here forever, but I'm going to try and learn what I can,
Mhm.
because every experience is a learning experience. And I think I didn't have that frame of reference or frame of mind when I was working there. So I was constantly frustrated. But if I were to go back and tell myself something, I would tell myself what I just said, that, you know, get what you can out of it. If you want to look for something different, look for something different. And I did. I looked to go to graduate school to kind of expand my learning experience. But it was only at graduate school that I understood how much I had really learned.
Nice. Um, what is one takeaway you would love people to learn from your experience, from any projects you've talked about today, both the built ones and the um, conceptual ones?
I I would say the biggest takeaway would be that every project, whether it's a planning project or a design project or a research project, has to have a conceptual beginning. That there has to be, we always talk about what we want to do and how we're going to do it. And I find that I was just at Georgia Tech doing a review a couple of weeks ago for fourth year architecture students. And one of my comments to them was that they were confusing their conceptual ideas with what they wanted to do. And typically that the conceptual idea comes out of how you're going to do it, you know. So I want to do a park landscape that is comfortable for people. Well, everyone wants to do that, right? So, but how you're going to do it, I'm framing the park design based on, the railroad line that used to run through the site, and so it becomes a linear process of spatial forms. So that's really the concept. So in my teaching, that's what I've always pushed. It's not so much the what, it's the how that develops the concept that you're talking about.
Mhm. That's a great perspective of how to take on a project.
Yeah. Yeah, we often get it wrong. It's like goals and objectives, we get those wrong too in planning reports.
Um, I guess another question would be, now that you've done a handful of different memorials, is there um, some something you would like to see in future memorials, like an aspect that you think is crucial to paying respect to that memory of whatever, if it's soldiers or the sorority or
Yeah, I think again it goes back to I'm like a big conceptual guy, I think it goes back to who is your client, what is the memory, what is the circumstance, and really, being spontaneous about exploring that and talking to the client and really understanding how to bring out the essence of those experiences into your design form. Um, and I think that keeps the designer from doing cookie cutter kinds of designs. It really forces you to make something special.
I love that. That's it's really great. I think with a lot of commercial projects, I think concept sometimes gets lost. So it's nice to see that you bring it into all sorts of aspects of your work.
Yeah, I mean, my office is small, so we have the luxury of doing that. But I think if I were working in a much larger firm, I would want to instill that in my staff. But I think it sometimes gets lost, and it becomes, well, what can I pull from this manufacturer of site furnishings, and what can I pull from here? And it becomes, kind of a manufactured landscape, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, I completely see that. Is there anything, I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat at the moment. I guess, is there anything you would like your audience to go home with? Any thoughts of like how they can have a diverse career and maybe a larger connection to their community?
Oh, tons, but I'll keep it down. I'll keep it to a few. I think I think it's important. I think not only because I'm a Black landscape architect and I'm always aware of diversity and people. You know, when I go to a meeting or I enter a room, I'm always interested in what's the diversity in this room.
Mhm.
And you know, I navigate any room. It doesn't matter who's there, but it's always important to me to understand the diversity in the room and to, you know, speak to different voices when I'm in a room. And also when working and in a meeting and when developing teams for projects, we're always interested in, do we have representation of women? Do we have representation of other minorities? Do we have enough representation of white people on the project? You know, I mean, so the diversity is, for me, is not just about having minority representation. It's about having a real diverse representation of people. You know, maybe someone who depending on the project, who is hearing impaired or, you know, whatever. So I think that's one thing that's in my career has been very important and always at the forefront of my thinking and doing proposals and working with other people. The second thing would be understanding how to work in teams. And that's a big part of working when I taught professional practice at the graduate level. I would always tell my students, when you go into a firm or a public agency, your supervisors will say things to you and you will wonder, what are they talking about? That's so rude. And never jump to conclusions and never respond immediately. Always go back and think about it. And if you're not sure about what they mean, just go back to them and say, I'm not quite sure what you mean about this particular point. I'm not so sure about what you want me to do in terms of this drawing. And I think most people are afraid to do that because they feel like it it says to the boss or whomever, you don't really know what you're doing. But I think at the end of the day, the boss would be more impressed if you ask for clarification so that when you do go back to do it, you're doing it correctly, or you're doing it not correctly, but in terms of, you know, what they specifically want you to do. And so I think often, and I've done this in my beginning career, I sort of reacted to requests to do work in an office or comments about my work in the wrong way without going back to the boss and saying, I'm not sure I understood what you meant. Did you mean this, or what did you mean? You know, getting clarification is really a powerful thing to do. And I started out talking about teams. I think it's important to understand what your particular strengths are when you're working in a team. If you're not a great graphics person, then you shouldn't be doing that in a team. And you should make it clear that maybe it's better if I did this. I'd like to do this in the team. Because building teams is about building, about bringing people to the team who are great in certain areas. We're not all the best in certain areas. One person may write better, one person may speak better. And I've always taught this sort of team collaboration in my design courses and other courses that I teach at the university level and also in private practice, that this idea of how you build a team, and you have to craft it around the strengths of the people that you're working with. That was 2 things, right? I said 3, but I'm
Yes.
forgetting. So those are things that I have learned, and I think have really helped me in my career. You know, you get clients that say things to you and react to the work that you're doing, and you could just scream at them. But you have to step back and kind of understand where they're coming from, ask a question. Well, give me a little bit more detail about why you don't like where this pool is located, you know, or something like that. So listening and responding carefully is a great tool.
Yeah, that's really great advice, to listen and listen to everyone's voice, make sure it's all included.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're just about at our hour. So I would like to thank you on behalf of Michigan ASLA. And I think this was a very informative webinar. It will be up on our YouTube channel. Once I don't know if we'll need to edit, but we will have it up on our YouTube, so it will be available for other people to watch. And we'd like to thank you again.
Yeah, and thank you very much. And I want one final thing. I wanted to thank you for the honorarium and let you know that I have donated it to the Black Landscape Architects Network.
Oh, fantastic. That's wonderful to hear.
Thank you.
Thank
Okay,
you so
great,
much.
Kim. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.